We are live. So I guess to start with, hi folks, welcome to the stream. Tonight, this is going to be some small schedule changes. We're going to do this chat about RISC-V security with Jay Beale, and Jay's going to give us his containers talk probably tomorrow or the day after. We'll reschedule that stream for a little later because it's getting a little late. But we all need a little caffeine here to keep us going. So. Because we're going to have a talk where Don and I are going to convince Jay that RISC-V is the future. So that's I mean we've got we're both religious alkalites and proselytizing the RISC-V religion, and we're going to try to convert the unknowing heathen.
Like, you want to convince me of the hacker's line? Risk is good. Risk is good, baby.
Risk is good. So yeah. So I guess let's set the stage a little bit. Let's go around and introduce ourselves a little bit for the folks. Hi, I'm Dragos Ruiu. I'm the conference organizer for PACSEC, which we're taking online into this new kind of format. We're doing all kinds of things to try to get people to interact, and I've had a great time over these last few streams, basically hanging out and being nerdy with folks and getting folks to interact and talk about a variety of up-and-coming topics: RFID, the future of InfoSec, AI, drones. And tonight we're going to talk about another topic that's near and interesting to my heart, and I'm looking for my prop. Oh, here it is. This is something that I've been using. It's the RISC-V architecture. I've been very interested in it, and I think it's going to be very important. So I've been reading up a lot about it. And with that, let me hand over to the next person. This board, Sci-5. This is basically a desktop class processor. You can get an underboard with it and basically build a full-blown PC. But it's a quad-core PC. I believe it's got 8 gig of RAM. It's got some serious horsepower. Basically, this is a good board to use as a build engine right now. It's one of the more powerful processors that is available for RISC-V, and there are a ton of them. It's going to be used everywhere, and I think that we can go over a little bit of that after we go over some introductions. So let's not steal our thunder. So please, Don, take it away.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And, I really appreciate the invitation to come hang out, man. This is great stuff. And Jay, it's awesome to see you. I feel like it's been way, way, way too long. Way too long. This year's been a decade, my friend. But for those that don't know, I'm Don Bailey. I've done a little bit of hacking here and there, but recently I've been primarily focusing on embedded systems and IoT security and some CPU security. In fact, I dropped a RISC-V architecture exploit and vulnerability at Hack in the Box 3 years ago, 2017, I believe that was. And I've been interested in RISC-V ever since it started popping up around 2016, 2017. It's been around for about 10 years, but it's only been blowing up recently because Sci-5 is really the first startup. That's the company, by the way, that made that board that Dragos was holding up. Yeah. But they've really put RISC-V on the map by actually manufacturing chips and getting them in people's hands. So highly recommended. If you want to jump online, you can download the specs for RISC-V for free. It's an open architecture. So it's actually all on GitHub, and you can purchase Arduino style RISC-V boards for like 25 to 50 bucks. I think there are a couple of them, but they're like the High-Five one. You can get those online on the Sci-5 website. They have a link to where you can actually purchase them online. The one that Dragos has is quite a bit more expensive, though. It's going for around $1,000 or so. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked because I'm tired, and it's Sunday. But currently, I am the RISC-V security response team acting chair. And what's really exciting about the organization is that we're trying to launch RISC-V for everybody while simultaneously getting security right. And obviously, that's something that's imperative for the ISA. But, ARM has a little bit rougher time managing security, obviously, because their architecture is so much more distributed. So we're trying to kind of consolidate a little bit more efficiently in RISC-V, and we're starting out by implementing an SRT in order to achieve that. But anyway, that's a long-winded version of saying, hi, I'm Don, I like RISC-V shit, and I'm here to talk about it. But Jay, please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name's Jay Beale. I'm the CTO and one of the founders over at InGuardians. And I'm here to stand in for you, to basically be someone to learn about this. So, I mean, I have colleagues who just have finally gotten me to buy into this idea that maybe it won't be it's not the end of the world if my i9 laptop, if my Intel i9 laptop is replaced by Apple Silicon, by ARM, by showing me the performance numbers can be pretty good, and we all know that energy consumption and heat is a whole heck of a lot nicer on ARM devices, and yet here we are, ARM's being bought by NVIDIA, and who knows what's going to happen. So I'm curious as hell, because when I think about it, I'm like, wait, if you're, I just think about what's the risk of ARM changing hands. What if they don't license it so readily anymore? I mean, Apple's basically taken, not to be an Apple fanboy, but Apple's basically said, screw it, we're making our entire business on ARM, on what we're doing with ARM as a license holder. And they're a license holder, and licenses expire, and that's and they're one of many ARM license holders. So just realizing that ARM isn't some kind of publicly held good or what have you, that it's being licensed, kind of gives you pause and makes you start getting, makes me, and from what I can read looking online, makes quite a number of other people very curious about RISC-V, but at this point I know nothing about it. I'm excited, except that when I was in college, there were RISC processors and MIPS processors, and that was all the rage. And now it's been more than 20 years since then, and can't wait to learn more. Thank you.
You actually kind of led into a perfect spot to start, because one of the most important things about the RISC-V architecture is its openness, right? So in ARM, we have kind of like a half open architecture. What I mean by that is, you can download most of the specs online for free, right? Without actually paying for anything or being a part of ARM. However, in order to actually implement it, then you've got to start paying licensing fees and some other fees on top of that. The specific names of which I forget, but regardless, to actually implement your own RISC-V chip, you can literally go to GitHub right now and download enough information to basically compile your own synthesized chip and send it off to a fab to be pressed into wafers. So you can literally make your own chips in the span of a couple of months with around $50,000.
Really? It's even easier than that. You can have you can download FPGA modules of FPGA versions of this architecture, and so this project, wow, I'm super excited about it. I don't know if Bunny Huang's precursor. I don't know if you've got. It's a RISC-V CPU inside an FPGA chip, intended to be all verifiable, and it's a really cool thing. So go check out Bunny Labs precursor. I'm about to sign up for the Kickstarter tomorrow. That's what I'm gonna do, because it's pretty. Actually, I'll bring it up here on the screen. So the one thing I was going to say, so yeah, you can download for in the FPGAs, but the one thing that's I think is really, really powerful about RISC-V is that they've created a new architecture, and it looks a lot like the old PowerPC architecture. It's a RISC clean architecture, lots of registers, but they basically started out the clean sheet of paper and added all of the things that you need in a modern architecture, as well as making it scalable. The space specification defines the core CPU itself, and then they've got a series of extensions to the base specifications that let you bring in SIMD instructions for AI and things like that. There's basically you can take the basic core module and add processor architecture sets to it and make it a fancier part architecture. So it's an architecture that you can strip down to a very, very tight core for an embedded application. It's being used in ruggedized hardened chips for space satellite applications because of this property. It's a clean, modern architecture. It has all the features you want. It runs fast. It's power efficient. It's basically the newest processor architecture, major processor architecture we have. And it's also open source so that many companies are now implementing processor cores. I mean, we've talked about Sci-5, and let's hear.
So many
while you're
questions.
looking up other ones, let me loop back for a second, because this actually brings up another really interesting point. So one thing DR pointed out that I think is one of the most interesting things about RISC-V is its modularity, right? With ARM, whenever you add on a new feature, you actually have to pay an additional licensing fee for that feature. So if you add on Trust Zone, that's another licensing fee. And so it just starts compiling into this larger and larger bunch of money that you've got to pay off to both ARM and then whoever else owns the IP for that particular thing you're plugging into your ARM core. Whereas with RISC-V, it's all literally open source. So you can literally just plug and play all these components as you want. And you can fab them. So like Dragos is right. You can literally use FPGAs to synthesize your own modular RISC-V CPU today. But you can do that with ARM as well. It's just you have to pay for an FPGA license with them, which is a couple $1,000s. It's not cheap, but it's not prohibitively expensive. But you can't make your own. You can't actually go, build your own chips without paying all those license fees. Whereas with RISC-V, you can test around in your FPGA, see if it works, see if you like the combination of modules you're using, and then ship it off to a fab for it actually to be pressed and shipped back to you as in a real chip form, which is super exciting.
Well, and you just talked about like, okay, it's modular. If I'm in the ARM world and I want trust zones or whatever, I'm gonna have to pay whoever. I'm gonna have to pay a license fee to whoever it is that's contributing that. Well, is it possible that's going to happen in the RISC-V world as well? Like, what is the license on a RISC-V? If I suppose, when Dragos started talking about open source, I started thinking like, wait, does that mean that like I want to add a few new instructions? I can create my own instructions, and now what license? What are the license requirements? Are we talking about a GPL thing? Are we talking like what are the requirements of the open source license if I do add on to it? Do I have to share? Do I have to share? Do I have to share source? I'm
no, there's no share back requirement. You can literally do what you want. So it's open source. I don't remember what exact license they're using because I've never had to care, in that I know that the model is it's open. You can use it and hack it in whatever way you want. And the changes don't need to be issued back to the community. So you can turn that into your own proprietary version of RISC-V and then go off and do your own thing. So the way that it actually works is, say, Sci-5 is a really good example because they're a startup that's not just, baking their own chips to do a thing. They have different kinds of cores. And you can license the core, the existing core, as an IP to plug into something you want to build. So say like you want to use their E3 core so that you can have a 64-bit, desktop viable architecture to sell, your own CPU for people to build laptops with. Like you go to Sci-5 and you license their core that's a proven RISC-V architecture core to do that thing. But you're not paying an additional fee for the RISC-V architecture itself. And that's the difference. Whereas if you go and buy Apple Silicon, right, just to use a blatant example, if you were able to buy Apple Silicon and then implement that in a CPU that you wanted to put into your own branded desktop, you not only have to pay Apple their fee, but you're also paying a markup on top of that to pay for the licensing fee for ARM and all the other things that go inside it. And none of none of that is applicable to the RISC-V model. So you're only paying Psi-5, but you're not also paying RISC-V on top.
Is it
So
is it
there's
a valid
couple other
question to
points
start
here,
asking about
too.
like boot security? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Dragos.
No, there is. Hold that boot security point, but I was going to make a quick point.
Will do.
So there's a whole bunch of different kinds. So our RISC-V already is a whole family of different processors of different kind of capability and price scale already. One of the interesting things that's happened with RISC-V is that ARM has actually changed its licensing in response to it. So they've actually released a whole bunch of things. With the existence of RISC-V has already created competition in this marketplace, and ARM has had to release a few things. I think because all of a sudden we have competition. We no longer have this monopoly lock on the money. So it's been kind of one of the fun things that's happened out there. But you're going to go into the boot and what's going on there. Was that your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and competition's good. Like anytime there's competition, we all get the chance to start saying, okay, well, what's your security story? What's your security story? Tell us what you're doing. And I want to ask so many questions. I want to ask about out of order execution and the kinds of processor bugs we've had with Intel and AMD. But yeah, just boot first. So yeah, what's the boot story when you're on RISC? Is there tell me about boot security. Is there a
I'm really glad you brought that up.
Is there a standard bootloader and so on?
Well, the cool thing about RISC-V's architecture is that you can kind of do whatever you want, but there's obviously kind of a preferred model, right? So in the RISC-V architecture, there are actually 4 layers where we're used to kind of an Intel model where you have, supervisor mode and user mode. And if you're an ARM person, then you've kind of got like supervisor mode in user mode, but then you might also have trusted mode for trust zone, where in RISC-V, there are actually 4 layers. So it's user land, supervisor, hypervisor, and machine. And that always exists. So depending on the CPU that you have implemented, it may only have a combination of those things. But according to the ISA, those 4 things are standard. Whereas in the ARM architecture, trust zone is really an afterthought. And the way they implement trust zone in ARM architectures is it's actually hypervisor driven. So there's a hypervisor layer that then has to be used in order to switch back and forth the CPU from trusted state to regular state and back and forth. You probably know that, Jay, but some people watching this may not be familiar with that.
Yeah.
When you think about the expense of switching back and forth like that, that's pretty expensive, which is why trust zone wasn't implemented in the Cortex-M architecture until only the last couple of years.
When I first heard about the feature years ago, and ARM was much slower at the time. I remember just being shocked, being like, "Holy, that's it's a lot, really expensive to implement in embedded devices." And
basically,
ARM isn't
it's
simply
almost
embedded anymore.
Yeah, and it's almost impossible, right? Which is why we've only seen, we've got the the M33, the M23. Those are all the trust zone enabled Cortex M's, and those have only actually seen fabrication in the past 3 years, right?
Wow.
So you think about that from a complexity and cost perspective, that's really inhibitive. But when you look at the RISC-V model, it's literally just a baked-in piece of the architecture so that you can manufacture a CPU that has a machine state, supervisor state, and user land state. There's no hypervisor required. The hypervisor layer is literally only handling virtualization, but machine mode is basically that trust layer that's your first boot. So as soon as the CPU launches, it's basically in machine mode. It can define all of its secure attributes, decide what kernel to load, but then it loads it into supervisor land. And then, of course, everything runs normally from there. And that's really great because now we don't have to worry about all the extra excess of virtualization. You only have a little bit more silicon to handle machine mode, but it's not that extra, complex, chunk of silicon required to implement all the extra stuff in the hypervisor machines. So that's kind of your fundamental.
I have one bit of disappointment, however. You'll see on screen. Here's the here's the RISC-V boot flow compared to the ARM64 boot flow, which is a little more intricate. RISC-V one is much simpler. But at the last stage, we're still using core boot and U-boot as the bootloaders, which is unfortunate in my opinion, because I don't know, if you've seen Ilya's and Joe's work on boot, they found, a list of bugs in the bootloaders that are just as long. So those are pretty, there's no exploit countermeasures in those bootloaders. They're pretty crude still in those days, and I think that's still a lot of attack surface there. Something that
100%.
definitely is going to have to be hard, and even in this architecture. So
well, Dragos, you're the
as Don said,
you're the BIOS attack guy. I mean, you know more better than anybody that there's a lot of erosion in this area, right? And that's kind of the cool thing. But that's actually,
and we're seeing practical attacks now.
This is why I got excited.
This stuff's actually being used in malware.
Oh, 100%.
Sorry, go on.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, that's one of the things that got me excited about RISC-V, because machine mode actually has so much capability. Because you're not constrained to like only a fragment of the capability of the CPU. It literally has, it can govern the entire processor and use the power of the entire processor to do first chain verification of whatever's executing. So if you have an audited version of a bootloader that doesn't suck like some of the ones that we're familiar with, you at least have the opportunity to verify that it's trusted before you start executing this, bootloader piece of code. So there's at least opportunity for improvement, but you're spot on. I mean, somebody needs to at least, give us a better U-boot. Replacement.
Yeah. As much as, we love it, it's venerable. We've used it for years, but it's showing its age.
It's time.
And
time. Put out the pasture.
I've actually, I'm speaking of BIOSes and everything. I'm forever terrified, is a good word to say it, of all the things we keep loading in at a lower and lower level. The bootloader was supposed to be simple, structure, very kind of get you there and let the OS deal with all. But we're increasingly making the bootloader its own native OS environment. I'm still waiting for hypervisor bootloaders, right? And to launch your hypervisor. It's gonna happen, and we're
Intel's putting web servers on chips now, right? So I mean, we're gonna get there regardless.
Well, and that probably should lead me to ask, TPM is TPM is a TPM kind of functionality, that's been, secure boot so often focused on signed, and a signed chain of a signed chain of boot is what I want to call it almost. But do we
chain
have
of custody?
Yeah, exactly. Chain of custody. Do we have chance? Is there anything like a TPM in this model?
100%. I mean, your machine mode is basically your TPM, right? Because when your kernel's running in supervisor mode, based on that privilege model, it can't reach into machine mode or anything that machine mode controls. So machine mode basically configures memory and says, here's my chunk of memory, and supervisor mode can't even see it. Hands-off control to supervisor mode for regular kernel usage, and the kernel doesn't have any clue that it's even there. So that's basically your TPM, because it can request calls, so it can actually issue interrupts that allows a transfer of control to machine mode, and then machine mode can take some kind of an action like, hey, can you cryptographically verify whether this is valid according to whatever's in your TPM? And machine mode will do that and respond and function basically like your standard TPM, but it's a lot cooler because your basic TPM is really just a brick. It's like a dumb IO brick, right? It basically just says, give me input, I'll validate it, and I'll give you some output. And there are a lot of attacks. And I see Dragos snickering over there because he knows, right? Like TPMs are dumb as hell, right? So there's all kinds of stupid shit you can do with them. Whereas with this, there you go. Yes. And in this architecture, because you're running a machine mode and there can actually be a full kernel world executing in that environment, there's so much more richness and so much more capability available to doing dynamic attestation, more complex validation. You could even analyze the supervisor mode to see if the kernel is running in a stable fashion, or if it looks like the kernel has been compromised in any way. So you can get really fancy with it.
Nice.
So, and to get back to answer Jay's question, so the speculative execution, you asked about the same kinds of traditional bugs. I mean, row hammer and those kind of things, those are silicon-based bugs. Those will be across all architecture. The speculative execution for RISC-V will depend on which architecture set you have, because the fancier architectures all have to do the look ahead and pipelining and executing instructions in semi-parallel ways. I mean, that's just how we've made Moore's law speed up. So there, I don't know. I've read the architecture spec. I have some hardware here I played with, but that's been about the extent. I can't go too deep on any one thing, but I'm fascinated by this, so I'm learning more. I don't know the answer to that question, whether widths is vulnerable the same. Is it going to be a lot more poking that's needed for this architecture? It's still early days, and the architecture is changing. We've had like 2 or 3 new processor introductions in the last 2 months for RISC-V. I've actually been on my to-do list was I was actually going to reach out to some of those manufacturers and bring them in here. Let's have a bigger discussion about the RISC-V security. And one of my hopes for this discussion is where we'll go is I want to drag some of the folks who've done disclosure and efforts on other areas. I've had some conversation with Andrea Barasani because he did OS cert, trying to learn what other people have learned from hardware architecture, because hardware bugs are a little bit different than a software bug. You can't, if it's something that you can't actually patch and it's deployed out there, a lot of things, you have to work a lot more on mitigations, and it's a little bit different. Now these days, a lot of processors are awfully soft. Right, there's microcode, there's other various things that you can change, and you can patch those. But I think that there's special considerations when you're talking about processor and architecture bugs. Plus, things like fixes take a lot longer to propagate. Let's look at the speculative execution bug timelines.
Oh, absolutely. And I can actually speak to this a little bit from my experience on the RISC-V security team. Because the way that we're kind of dealing with it is we're allowing 2 things to occur, essentially, right? And one of those things is we know that the implementers themselves are going to be the point of entry for those types of vulnerabilities. Because in the ISA, you can really only architect so much. You can define guidelines that tell people how they should implement certain things, like out of order, pipelining, all that kind of cool stuff. But having a high-level description of how that should be oriented in the architecture does not map to the implementation in silicon that can then be exploited. So we basically have like best practice sets that ensure that people are doing things that we know from an architectural, high-level architecture perspective are going to be somewhat of a mitigation, or at least a stopping gap. But it's up to them to go the rest of the way to actually ensure that the implementation is sound. So no matter what we do, there's still an opportunity for each implementation to have its own gaps. And one other person that would be really interesting to talk to would be Ralph Philip Wyman, because he's looked extensively at ARM errata for particular implementations that have CPU bugs that the architecture says, here's how you should be doing it, but the implementation fails. And he might be able to actually talk to analogs that might appear in the RISC-V space.
Ironically enough, he was actually, we're trying to drag him to this broadcast tonight to talk about Wi-Fi.
Really?
So he's actually on he's on the SecWest.net, this Discord server. So if you want to have that discussion, I can definitely broker it. And if you want to actually have it on a stream, I would love to see that discussion, because I call Ralph RPW one of the most dangerous men on the planet.
Oh, 100%.
I will make that happen.
Thoughts. Yeah, he would be great to talk to.
We'll schedule a sequel here.
Sounds good to me.
I'm up for it. Let's do it.
Well, Dragos, you made a point just a few minutes ago. You said listen, we're on early days on this platform, and in the last couple months, we've had 2 different processors drop. And I found myself thinking like, okay, well, how early days are we? Like, are any larger companies using RISC-V or RISC-V, or is it just, well, I can get an Arduino sized board, or I can get a Dragos's build board for $1,000, but is anybody using it yet? Where will I find it?
Let's see.
So one of the premier founding members of RISC-V, the foundation, is Western Digital, and they are literally rolling out drives that have RISC-V chips in them now.
Wow.
And not just to consumers, but also like the stuff that they sell en masse to Google and that kind of stuff for use in data centers. So they're taking it very seriously. They are very on it. And also, I mean, just look at the RISC-V membership list. We've got Oculus is actually on there. Yeah, Google, Giga Device, they're building stuff with this. So Nordic is a really fascinating one. IBM's using it for cloud computing. Lattice is on. Obviously, Low Risk, Bunny, they're manufacturing chips, so they're doing interesting things as well. Maxim, Microchip, endless amount of companies. Nokia is on here now. I didn't even know about Nokia. Yeah, NVIDIA's on there as well, obviously.
It's literally sneaking into all kinds of companies in all kinds of places. Chinese phone manufacturer are using it. There's a lot of, it's very popular in those companies there because it's not encumbered by licensing and by, it's also doesn't have hidden sections of the processor architecture manual that you have to license. It's kind of very open book that way, and so it's verifiable. It's very easily verifiable for that. I think
that's really exciting.
That's one of the reasons I'm so bullish on it, because I think that it's going to be popping up all over the place. I mean, honestly, both ARM, Intel, and AMD are probably all looking over their shoulder like this, going, these guys are catching up fast, and they're going into all kinds of places very, very quickly because the ease of the licensing. It's really just kind of mushroomed in the last year in terms of applications and stuff. I mean, this RISC-V board, I think I got that. I'm trying to remember when that actually Kickstarter released. It's been a while, but
2 years
so it's been
ago.
around a long while. But yeah, I think that it was. I think I got it last year. I think the Kickstarter started last year, but they finally delivered like last summer or sometime. I think is what I'm thinking. Was my memory.
That sounds right.
But so they, yeah, and it's literally it's sneaking into all kinds of places because the IP is easy. It's an easy processor architecture to fit to whatever it is that you're doing. So I think we're going to see it sneaking in all kinds of places, which is one of the reasons why I'm so focused on learning on about it, because I think it is really a good time to get in on understanding what's going on there in the early days as you ride this wave.
Well, I mean, put it this way. I've been on the RISC-V, I've been a member of RISC-V for like 3 years now, 2.5, something like that. I'm on the, security board or whatever you call it. And I didn't even know that Alibaba's cloud company is on our premier members list now. So is Huawei. So is ZTE. I didn't even know about ZTE.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're moving quick.
There's lots
basically
to be said.
Everybody who's worried about ARM and Intel is going this way.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just, I mean, I definitely like some of the security ramifications of having an open source hardware platform. I mean, there are, like, we're talking about software supply chain a ton nowadays. I've seen some really bright people move. I've been doing a bunch of work in Kubernetes, and I've seen. I remember being like, I saw a bunch of people move into software supply chain from there, and like one of them was Maya. I'm trying to remember how to say her last name. It's Kozarowski, and she worked at Google on Kubernetes security, like just did a ton of amazing work, and she left Google to go work at GitHub on software supply chain. And I'm like, wow, okay, if somebody that capable is taking, is leaving one thing that's as hot as Kubernetes security to work on software supply chain, this must be something I should really start looking into. And as I started talking with more and more people who were trying to handle supply chain, that software supply chain or hardware supply chain issues, you start to realize, wow, this area is deep and nowhere near well enough handled. And everyone's worried. I think I want to say everyone's such a broad term, but like there are many folks who are definitely up at night thinking about the odds that your hardware, from the point that your manufacturer is sending it to you to the point that you get it, gets modified in shipment, or as you're racking to the data center by a hostile attacker. But even more than that too, companies that are making their own systems are concerned about whether or not they're fabricators, or whether are backdooring hardware, or whether suppliers are backdooring pieces. So the idea of having an open source system, and thus something that might be verifiable and auditable, that's pretty exciting. And I say that as somebody who knows very little about supply chain and absolutely very little about hardware, but I'm curious.
You're spot on about all those things. I don't know how to say it any clearer than that. RISC-V is really an opportunity to sidestep all those complexity issues. You go back to the ARM point, right? And Dragos pointed out earlier, you buy one piece of ARM core, and it's going to automatically integrate 5 different things that are like sneak licenses, and just in order to implement one particular portion of a chip. You know what I mean? And each one of those pieces of technology comes from a different vendor, and that vendor has an opportunity to put something directly on your AXI bus that can then manage or access physical memory for the entire core. So there are a lot of opportunities to subvert the entire thing. But with RISC-V, I'm not going to try to complain or imply that the RISC-V architecture is perfect, but you have a much bigger opportunity to actually have visibility into all aspects of the pieces that you're putting together when you're building one particular core. So even if a vendor is out there is using 5 other vendors to implement a thing, because of the licensing model, because of the open source model, you should actually be able to see the bulk of all of that stuff. And then at the end of the day, you can kind of pick and choose. If there is some IP that you don't get full visibility into, do you trust the company? And it may simply just come down to that, where with ARM, you really don't get that kind of piecemeal visibility and that piecemeal level of trust, right? So it's definitely something to consider.
That also honestly just makes me alarm. I know we're in. Oh, sorry.
No, you go, Jay.
Well, that makes me, the idea, we've all been in the situation where you say, wait, I'm buying software, I'm buying or obtaining software from one party, and they don't really publish much about vulnerabilities all that often. And another group does really, really well at that. The great thing we've all found, I think, when open source is involved, and when you do have, and when you do know, when you have that kind of like bill of materials, that transparency bill of materials, you can be like, okay, I'm gonna find out not whoever made the chip, whether they said there's a vulnerability, but if they're using this version or what have you of the RISC-V platform, then that's one of the places I'll be watching to see if there are vulns, and then I know what to go and hold my chip manufacturer to the fire for. I don't know. I'm hoping they can do something about it. You were saying, Dragos, things are going with microcode. Things have gone soft more often, and so there are options besides replace the chip. But I don't know if I'm hitting a right.
There's a strength. there's a strength and a diversity to all this. However, though, it's a weakness, and so you've got the software is more verifiable, and you have more versions of it. There's lots more. There's I think 8 different processor manufacturers right now, I think, or at least or more, and who knows how many embedded and other ones who just licensed the IP and put it in something that we don't know about. So there's more variety. You can compare them to each other, but it also brings in a potential weakness too, because you've got all these different implementations. Each implementation may have some corner cases and some attack surface that is unique to its particular processor. So the diversity is a blessing and a curse at the same time. So it's going to be, I think, one of the interesting challenges that to get this on topic. That's one of the challenges of RISC-V, is that you do have so many more different versions of the processor, so many more little things. So this thing could be broken and could be a vulnerability in this implementation that these other implementations may have not messed up in some other way or something. So that's, I think, one of the things that that's going to have to be looked at here as that ecosystem starts to evolve and we see those percolating. But it's a really exciting time because these applications are just percolating to the point where they're now getting into the hands of consumers. I got that Kickstarter board 2 years ago, but now that's been prototyped. Now these things are starting to wind up into products and they're hitting the street finally. So it's a very exciting time for this particular architecture, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I'm kind of blown away that if I want a RISC-V processor, all I got to do is find one of the recent Western Digital drives. I might find one in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You can literally buy a Xilinx Spartan. Yeah.
Oh, I just have to throw this factoid out there because Western Digital is a fascinating company, and if I remember correctly, actually, I'll circle back on that because I want to verify. Now I'm questioning myself. We'll come back. Well, you had a point to make.
I was going to say, so literally, I wanted to stress this point to you. Go out and buy a Xilinx Spartan FPGA board. You download a RISC-V core to it. You can get that off the shelf from Mouser or any of your electronic suppliers. Have it on your desk tomorrow, and you can have a RISC-V processor doing whatever you want. I was actually particularly interested. I originally joined the Kickstarter because I wanted something that I was gonna make this a gateway and an IDS box, because I wanted an architecture that was completely weird and different. So I wanted something logging my systems that didn't have an ARM trust core and an ARM core or an Intel management engine in it. I wanted something weird and unusual because we tend to get some sophisticated attackers back from the point when we were doing own-to-own and all the other stuff with the things we do at a security conference. So we have some unique security challenges. So it excites me. I like diversity. I think that the monoculture in processors is a dangerous thing that we need to get away. I miss when I first started going into computing. We had like 10 or 12 processor architectures competing with each other. If you remember that, we had IBM Power PC. Everybody had Spark and all the other things. And now we've kind of narrowed down to these 2 major ones, and we got a third one that's kind of steaming like a submarine under the water and about the surface, and everybody's not realizing how huge it's becoming. So I think it's really time that we need to focus a little bit on security research on it, which is why we're having this talk right now.
A little hacker lore for everybody actually, watching this. I can't remember who that was. I don't remember if it was Lance or Aleph One or who, but back in the day when there were a bunch of email archives that ended up getting leaked, and one of the emails was to Theo and OpenBSD, and somebody was asking him, hey, if we run OpenBSD on a Spark, do you think it'll be less likely that somebody could compromise it? Because how many people are actually hacking Spark? What is it, like Duke? You know what I mean? So it's not, you're actually spot on about the monoculture thing, because people just want to hit Intel and they want to hit ARM. They're not thinking about RISC-V, just in the same way back in like 1998. They weren't thinking about hacking Spark as much. The only people who were doing that were like ADM and, LSD. That's pretty much it.
Oh, you're bringing me back to some good old days.
I just always remember that email asking Theo, like, how much more secure can we make OpenBSD if we run it on Spark? Like, what additional security attributes will the Spark processing architecture give us if we're running it there? And I just find that, I don't know why that email always stuck out in my head. And it's fascinating that 20 years later, we're literally having the same conversation. Is the CPU and this operating system going to give us more power? You know what I mean? That little bit of an edge.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, you know, the operating systems haven't evolved that much. So it's really kind of an interesting thing to look back on some of those old emails.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
we're going to
curious.
see the same learning. We're going to see a similar learning curve as, you know, with most processor architectures with all this stuff, because there's always things we find out later on that were oversights, you know, like Intel speculative execution bugs and things like that that are like, whoa, you know, if we'd have known this, we'd have done this way different. So I'm sure we're gonna encounter some of those same kinds of steps and researches and discoveries in this area. But it's pretty exciting, fresh new green field right now. And with that, I'm gonna let's wrap it up fairly soon because it's getting a little late. I think we're all getting a little punchy, and so
yeah,
5 minutes each to close, or whatever you want to say.
Oh, I
You wanna
think
go
it's
first, Jay?
no. I've just asked the two of you do. I'm honestly just here to learn. I'm kind of trying to ask the best questions I
That's
can
great.
on
Thanks,
behalf
Jay.
of other people.
I think it's easier to do this with somebody who is like an audience and asking the questions. I really like that a little bit better. I think this would have gone a lot would have been we would all been nodding a lot more if it was just Dawn and I talking about this, but it's been kind of nice to actually have you here to explain it. So thanks
Well, the problem with you and me
us.
doing it, DR, is that we would just sit here getting way too deep in the weeds, and everybody would wonder what the fuck we were talking about. It's great having Jay here.
Yeah.
Hey,
You can keep us on topic.
Man, throw me into. You should throw me into some other panels, as it were, because it just means I just get to sit here and learn and try to think like what would people want to ask.
I'm going to do more of these because I really like this. So, you know, I'll say this now. RISC-V is one of these sort of hot areas that I'm going to be interested in for years. You know, I'm OCD obsessed about it right now. So I think we should have some more discussions about RISC-V, and we should pull in. So we will schedule a sequel to this. And
awesome.
So to you, nice. Dawn, thank you very much for having this chat with me. I really we'll be talking more about RISC-V vulnerabilities. I'm gonna drag some more folks to have conversations like this and do some presentations. So
I gotta tell you, I was so excited awesome. When you picked up RISC-V, because as soon as you got interested in it, that I knew that everybody was gonna soon follow. You know what I mean? Because you're always the guy that's like at kind of the edge. You're at the bleeding edge. You know what I mean? And I've been kind of like one of the only people. Yeah, I've been like one of the only people looking at RISC-V for a few years now, and I even submitted the talk that I made at Hack in the Box at Black Hat. And the Black Hat guys, like, we all know, you know, the Black Hat review board, and even they were like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, this is way too early. Nobody cares about this. Punt." And I'm like, "But it's gonna be huge, and nobody's seen it yet." And I'm like,
"But you don't know. Look at this Huawei ZTE." Yeah. So once the light bulb goes on, you're gonna go, "Oh God, that's gonna be huge. We got to pay a lot more attention to that."
Yeah, and
preaching to the choir here.
So, the coal mine is now like, I can always point to like, oh, you think RISC-V still isn't all that interesting? Dragos is into it. So there you go. There's your canary.
Yeah,
we're good now.
I'm an early adopter. So there's actually stats. They've proven that 19% of the people are early adopters. And so they will try a technology before they've seen value in it, before they will try something to. I'm definitely in that. So there's another 19% at the other end of the tail. There's a bell curve. You know, there's like whatever the 60% in the middle, 62%. But the other 19% will refuse to adopt any changes or new technology until everybody around them has it and has seen benefits of it. So there's kind of three personality types, and most of the people are in the middle. They'll wait for the early adopters to crash and burn, and they'll when it's finally been fixed, they'll adopt it when they see the value in it. So I'm definitely the guy that's always doing the crashing and burning, because what's that shiny thing? So
Yeah.
but
you were
this
into
is definitely
drones,
the
like,
new shiny thing on the processor.
yeah, you were into drones like 10 years
Yeah,
before everybody.
2004.
Oh,
Yeah,
easily.
way before
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah, I've been flying.
I have to say though, sometimes it's really nice being in the second or third group. I'm usually in that. I early adopt on some things, but but man, especially if they cost money, I try like all hell to not be in that early adopter group, but definitely not be in that tail group. But the tail group, man, do they get the best like polished stuff way cheaper? Like it's just kind of like, for me, that was years ago. I remember like I had to get a digital camera at the beginning. Like everyone was like sub 1 megapixel. People were buying these things for more than $1,000, and I was frugal, and I finally bought one at 3 megapixel because I was like, you can't get a lot better than this, and that's it's probably worth it and useful. And I thought I'd totally won. And then a few years later, I've got a friend who paid half what I paid for my camera to get like a 12 megapixel camera, and well,
oh wow,
yeah, you're just like on the red eye deletion and all, and you're just like, whoa, this was your first was the 12 megapixel. I just okay. That's what that third group is. Like, you wait till they wait until absolutely everybody else has it, but by the time they get to it, it is really good and really cheap. But they've also missed out on having it in their lives for longer. So it's such a
when
balance.
I'm thinking about the analog of like, well, when I first got the internet, it was AOL, and now these kids these days with their 80 megabit
oh my god,
home line.
I can give you the counterpoint of why you're actually probably smarter than me, Jay. Because take, for instance, with the Oculus Kickstarter, I have a case downstairs. I was so excited when it first came out, the very first Oculus device, and
sure,
it was horrible. I thought it was going to change the world. Oh, VR, finally, it's except we can mount. So I got the thing. It's 640 by 480. It's ugly. You get motion sickness in the thing from the flicker in it after wearing it for about 10 minutes. It was whatever, 8 years ago, but it was brilliant. Right, it was great. So nowadays, this is the next generation, the Windows mixed media device, and I got an Oculus over there, and so these are all obsolete devices. I've spent a couple of $1,000, and you've got. Is that the Oculus 2?
It's a Q2.
This is the 2. This is the 2. I'm using it. So every game save one, save the Star Trek game I'm playing with some other InfoSec guys. Every game I'm playing on this is massively physical. Is that Beat Saber style, or the Supernatural, or the and I'm
gun
playing
shooting
and I'm doing it with wrist weights and now Weight Vest. Yeah, like like literally I've had in my life, I had like when I went to college, no game systems because have to study, and after college, there were no computer game systems until the Xbox 360 with the Kinect on it, or the Xbox whatever with the Kinect sensor, where you could play video games by jumping around. And like you're jumping around, you're waving your arms. You are like, my stepdaughter actually sprained her ankle running while playing an Xbox Kinect game. And that's my measure of like a good video game. If the video game is so physical you can injure yourself, like from working out too hard, that's awesome. So this is my second video game system since in my adult years is this Oculus Quest. It's amazing. And so to bring it back to this, you said where Oculus is looking at RISC-V too.
They are.
But
if you keep wearing a plate carrier and weight stuff on your arms, by next Black Hat, you're going to be fucking ripped.
I just want to be in the shape I was in my 30s. It was awesome. I had a lot more time on my hands to lift or or rock climb or all the things. So
For kids, eh?
oh my God.
But to bring it
it's
full
awesome.
circle,
They're
to
amazing.
get
Yeah.
so
RISC-V.
it took like 4 generations. That one you have, that's the consumer one. Finally, we're getting there. And I know
Yeah.
what you mean about the games. On the Oculus one, there's a gun game there, and I literally get physically exhausted just waving my hands around and doing it. Eventually, I have to quit
wow.
just because I'm tired, which is an interesting phenomenon in a video game. Finally, but
They're-
the early
there's
adopters, they sink a lot of money to get to the point where you are now with the final
But thank
consumer
you for
devices,
doing it.
right?
Like,
So
like,
we're guinea pigs.
like we wouldn't, if you didn't sink the money, we wouldn't have it. And but it also,
Yeah,
but you get to experience. I mean, like, to bring it back to RISC-V here, right? And the benefits of adopting on the earlier side. And I think we're probably. It sounds like we're still in the early adoption period, but just barely, because of all these companies that are going there already. It's sounds like we're going to get toward that mainstream soon. And and getting in early is like in tech. So in tech, getting in early is often, just really gives you a leg up on on building a lot of, on building capability. And that's, like Don, I think that, I think you and Dragos both jumping into security and RISC-V, like it's not just an edge for you. It's also you're going to be doing us all a great service, because we're going to end up on these processors. Like we're going to be apparently, if I have the right hard drive, I might be already. But so I guess
I certainly won't overstate. Well, I wouldn't overstate my value. I mean, my involvement in RISC-V has always just been like, I'm the outsider guy, right? Because I'm not a processor PhD, and I'm not somebody that's been in processor design for 10 years as a PM or an exec or whatever. I'm just some hacker guy that came in off the street and was like, I love what you're doing. Let me do anything. You know what I mean? Like, literally just let me have a seat near you somewhere in the building. And they were like, go look at security shit. So, it's really been fun watching everybody grow and watching the ecosystem grow. And I'm so excited to see, people like Dragos, and having a conversation with you, Jay, is just exceptional. And seeing Bunny actually launching a company in RISC-V.
Oh my God.
So cool.
Wow.
So cool. Yeah, it's great. I don't know what the hell is going to happen. All I know is that this is an exciting place to be, with a great potential future. So hopefully we'll do some really amazing things. But yeah, you have the benefit of Dragos and my money getting thrown at all of these, preliminary architectures. So hopefully we'll get there very soon for you.
Thank you.
But it's an exciting time for this research, and this will not be the last conversation you'll see about RISC-V, I guarantee you, and security. So it's still early days. And on that note, I'm going to hit end on the broadcast, say bye to folks. We'll schedule a presentation for Jay shortly, and we actually have a couple more panels that we're gonna schedule out. I'm really enjoying this format of just like geeky chats here, and
this is great.
It seems that we're getting folks to watch it, and it's resonating. So we'll probably be doing more of them. So thank you guys for a lovely evening, and bringing back a little bit of that magic interaction that we have with people at conferences into my life, that kind of fills up a great big vacuum there. So much love to both of you.
Yeah,
thank you so much for having
me.
Hell of a hallway con tonight. Like the three of us doing this hallway con. Cool. This was really nice. Thank you for doing it.
Very cool.
Like in COVID times, this is really, really helpful.
Yeah, it definitely warms the heart a little bit, I gotta say. Thanks, gentlemen. It's great seeing both of you.
Okay.